COVID-19. Like you, it wasn't until early 2020 that I started paying attention to this. Then came the investigation, then came the revelations, and then the writing. Tonight, join me as I tell you what I've discovered about where the virus came from and when it first appeared. Mr. President, welcome. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
You've seen all of the intelligence. When do you think the virus first started?
Well, some of the intelligence is classified, and I can't talk about it, but common sense tells you it most likely, and when I say most likely, like 95% came from the Wuhan lab. I don't know if they had bad thoughts or whether it was gross incompetence, but one way or the other, it came out of Wuhan, and it came from the Wuhan lab.
Ladies and gentlemen, please rise for His Excellency Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the CPC Central Committee, President of the People's Republic of China, and Chairman of the Central Military Commission.
They're the Olympic Games for military athletes. Held every 4 years, Wuhan was the host city in 2019.
And I didn't even know about the military games until someone from the Army called me in December of 2020 and asked me if I could explain what happened at the Wuhan military games and whether these people had fallen sick with an early emerging strain of COVID.
As the site of a potential virus superspreader, it doesn't get much bigger than this. And in the weeks and months that followed, reports emerged of athletes becoming sick.
It is suspicious. I mean, we do see some indications in our own data, you know, that NIH has, that there was COVID circulating in the United States, certainly in the earliest month of, you know, as early December, possibly earlier than that. I mean, some of these people who came back from those games were sick with something.
More than 9,000 athletes were there. 2 weeks later, they returned home to more than 100 countries.
Oh, I know that people got sick. I believe there were French athletes got sick. I believe there are Germans. Some Americans got sick too. But getting sick in Wuhan in that particular time frame of the kind of symptoms that are very similar to what would later known to be coronavirus symptoms, that obviously deserve investigation.
No one was ever tested, but there was one man who knew something was wrong. China's most famous defector to the United States, the father of his country's democracy movement.
I thought that the Chinese government would take this opportunity to spread the virus during the military games, as many foreigners would show up there.
Diamond, let's start with the night Wei Jingsheng came over for dinner at your house on November 22. What was different about that night?
There was an urgency about Wei's manner. I mean, Wei normally is a very relaxed person, but that night was a little bit different because he talked in almost a different tone.
Diamond Liu and Wei Jingsheng are close friends. She's a high-profile human rights advocate. He was once a Communist Party insider. He'd come to Diamond looking for help. Who could he tell in America there was a virus on the loose in Wuhan? Did he think this was a coronavirus?
Yes, he did say it was coronavirus.
How did he know about it?
Well, in the among the Chinese diaspora, there have been talks about it. And Wei, being who he is, tend to be the recipients of many information. People seek him out.
Wei Jingsheng spent 18 years in Chinese prisons for standing up to Beijing. In '97, he made global headlines when he defected to the United States. Wei still has impeccable contacts high up in the party, and they were telling him a virus was spreading in Wuhan in October. When did you first hear that there was a virus in Wuhan? Was it during the time of the military games?
Yes. I learned there was an unusual exercise by the Chinese government during the military games. And so I told Diamond about the possibility of the Chinese government using some strange weapons, including biological weapons, because I knew they were doing experiments of that sort.
There was nothing in the news at the time. I mean, it was... No one had mentioned a thing.
No, no one had mentioned a date.
Diamond wasn't the first person Wei told there was a coronavirus in Wuhan. He now tells me he passed on the same information to US intelligence and one politician as early as October 2019. It turns out Wei's warning wasn't the only piece of intelligence the agencies had at that time that warned of an outbreak in Wuhan.
We knew this, but we didn't know it. My shock was that we had actually could have had foreknowledge.
David Asher is a veteran weapons investigator. He led a US government task force into the origins of COVID-19. And in late 2020, he unearthed intelligence that Wuhan Institute of Virology scientists fell sick with COVID-like symptoms. But what alarmed him was just how long Washington had sat on this classified intel.
I was very surprised at the level of detail that they were able to produce around information that they had probably collected well over a year before that. So in November of 2020, we learned things that they had collected in November 2019.
Wuhan is located in the central Chinese province of Hubei. It's home to 11 million people. Also in this sprawling metropolis is one of the world's leading biological research facilities, the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
It was built by the French and included a cooperation agreement, which meant that French scientists would be included in the research groups in Wuhan and that they would work together on this virological research. By the end of 2014, they had effectively excluded all the French that were in the Institute. And, the suspicion on the part of the French was that, that they were pushed out because of the Chinese military interest in the work.
So what could this indicate about the type of research they were intending to undertake at the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Well, I mean, the suggestion would be its relevance to biological warfare.
In terms of coronavirus research, what was going on in the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
Well, so what we do know, I mean, is that they were one of the world's leading repository of coronaviruses.
That research was headed up by Shezheng Li. They call her the Batwoman. She's China's top virologist, and her specialty, bat viruses.
So it does look like COVID-19, at some point did originate as a bat virus. That I think most people would accept that as a premise. The question then is more about how did those changes occur that make it unique and that make it so well adapted to humans.
In 2012, Shenzhen Li hit pay dirt. At a disused mine in southwestern China, 6 workers fell ill after clearing away bat manure. 3 died from a coronavirus. But Beijing covered it up and told no one.
To a virologist obsessed with SARS-like viruses, that mine was a gold mine, pardon the pun, for new viruses to study. And they've returned to it at least 5 times, the Mojiang mine. That's what Xi Jinping has been doing for 2 decades. She's been going around various bat caves, mostly in Yunnan, China, and collecting bat viruses.
Hundreds of samples were brought back to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. There, scientists were slicing, manipulating, and combining genetic sequences from different viruses together.
The story of the mine's intriguing, one, because most of us only first learnt about it, in early 2020, when the Wuhan Institute of Virology said, we've gone to all the viruses, coronaviruses we've got stored in the lab to look to see, did we actually have COVID-19 in our repository? And then they said, we didn't find, COVID-19, but hey presto, we found, the very closest genetic relative to this, which is rat G13. Here it is.
RATG13 is the name of one coronavirus they extracted from the bats in those caves. It is 96.2% identical to the virus that causes COVID-19.
Then the natural question is, did they find COVID-19 on one of those trips? And if so, why haven't they told us about it? Or did they manipulate, rat G13 or one of the other coronaviruses that they found in this cave, and that created COVID-19? And of course, that always raises the question, well, how far did they push the boundaries? What research were they doing?
By early 2020, this administration has developed a very healthy and justifiable suspicion of a lot of things China is saying is doing and China promised to do.
Miles Yu was Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's principal China advisor. As 2020 rolled in, Miles started paying close attention to Wuhan.
For weeks and weeks, the Chinese government kept silent on the outbreak. They're not saying anything, as if nothing is happening. So citizen journalists are beginning to send out their videos and reports and hospital situation reports on a daily basis.
就凳子上躺着。
我们今年的疫情堪比03年的非典。 而2次疫情的爆炸都是因为对于事实的隐瞒，对于信息的封锁，我们不能一错再错了。
One of those citizen journalists is Chen Kuishi. He's also a lawyer. Chen had heard China was covering up the unfolding tragedy in Wuhan. So he went there and started posting videos.
那个护士还主动问我，你看没看网上那3具尸体停走廊里的视频？ 我说看了，对，那个官方已经辟谣了，但是是真的。我说啥？官方已经辟谣了，但是是真的。
And then he disappeared. Mr. President, what evidence were you presented with that convinced you that it did in all likelihood come from a lab?
Well, I started hearing stories that you have also, that there were lots of body bags outside of the lab. And people were saying there are a lot of people lying down on the streets of Wuhan, and there were body bags.
Body bags outside of the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I heard that a long time ago. And if they did, in fact, have body bags, that was one little indication, wasn't it?
Was that something that came from the agencies, the intelligence agencies? Is that what they were telling you?
I don't know where it came from. Ask China. But you're going to have to figure that out, and you probably won't be able to do it, knowing you.
President Trump told me that there were body bags outside the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Is this correct?
I don't want to talk about particular things. Presidents get the chance to talk about things that some of the rest of us can't. But there was an enormous, albeit indirect, evidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the center point for this. Remember, too, there were 14 American diplomats on the ground in Wuhan at this time who were watching and observing what was taking place inside of Wuhan. I hope one day that we'll be able to get that information out more broadly, but as I come back to it, the cumulative evidence that one can see points singularly to the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
If there was really no blame here, if this was really just some naturally occurring virus because someone ate a bat from a wet market, China wouldn't have done the things that they did. The Chinese Communist Party would not have shut down Wuhan. They would not have silenced doctors and scientists and journalists and disappeared some of them.
John Ratcliffe was the United States Director of National Intelligence, the overlord of 18 different agencies. When did the intelligence community first become aware that there was a virus spreading in Wuhan?
You know, in late 2019, we have intelligence from both, human intelligence sources and signals intelligence sources and other intelligence sources that were telling us that there was some sort of a problem in Wuhan.
Key to that assessment was intelligence that 3 people working in the Wuhan Institute of Virology had become sick in October 2019. This was well before the first official case was eventually announced in late December.
What Mike Pompeo and I put out is, people became sick at the lab in October and with symptoms that became entirely consistent with what most people have experienced around the world from COVID-19.
Do you believe that to be the first cluster of the pandemic?
Based on everything I've seen, this is the first cluster.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Former CIA Director Mike Pompeo was Secretary of State during the pandemic. His knowledge of COVID-19 was second to none in the Trump administration.
I have seen no evidence that there's a cluster that began any place but this. I am all ears to see of any evidence that presents some fact set to the contrary.
David Asher also agrees that this could have been the first cluster of the pandemic.
My shock was that we could have had foreknowledge. We could have known in November of 2019 that there was a disaster occurring inside Wuhan, inside their most important biological facilities, where something absolutely tragic, traumatic, and dramatic was occurring, and we could have reacted to it. I said we could have, the whole world could have been different. It would have been like stopping 9/11 before it happened.
Which raises the question, if US intelligence knew there was a virus in Wuhan in late 2019, why didn't they do anything about it? Was this an intelligence failure?
We collect everything and know nothing in our governments these days. It's the big data problem. We're all drowning in it. We had the means to know something, but we didn't either analyze it or disseminate it or even know that it was collected.
I always worry about that. As the former director of the CIA, I was always worried that we were collecting information, but we weren't able to process it sufficiently timely and get that information to the right places.
Is this a pandemic that potentially could have been prevented had the intelligence agencies paid closer attention to the information that was coming in?
We'll have to go look back at what was actually in the possession, what was the complexity of the information, what was the certainty of that information.
Should there be a review?
Sure, I think we always should go back and look at how we collected and what we knew and why it was we weren't able, that didn't send the signal up the line in a way that was, would have led to a better outcome.
Did they survive, those 3 workers who got sick?
What I can say is that from the intelligence perspective is we know that some of the people that were most involved, either infected or reporting on or whistleblowing on or trying to get answers and journalists report on, have been difficult to track down later, at least from my time there. And so, you know, I think that's consistent with what the Chinese Communist Party does. Why, you know, the status of those individuals and why they've disappeared, I really can't comment on that.
One of those people who was reported to have disappeared was Huan Yanglin. Is she one of the ones that we believe fell sick with COVID-19?
I don't know her status, but you know, the information that you're talking about that's out in the public domain is consistent with what I've seen and what I'm familiar with.
Huan Yanglin was a researcher at the Institute. In early 2020, she disappeared from its website. Her social media presence also vanished. Despite Beijing's denials, many believe Huang was infected with COVID-19. She's never been seen since.
You know, in the West, you might say, oh, this person just want to protect her privacy. In China, privacy in the interest of the state doesn't exist. So it would have been such a big, triumphant media scoop for the Chinese government to showcase her, to give like 10 seconds of her appearing somewhere, making a speech, show up in the news media, and that would have basically scored a major victory for the Chinese propaganda machine. She never did. She is literally disappeared from public view. Making people disappear is actually a major feature of the regime. I mean, it's actually truly a People's Republic of disappearances. Dissidents, journalists, and anybody the government doesn't like, they disappear. They disappear into oblivion forever. This is basically a regime that is not only capable of doing these things, and then do this with great pride.
And it's not only people that go missing. On the 12th of September 2019, the virus database at the Wuhan Institute of Virology was taken offline. 22,000 coronavirus samples gone.